Again, I'm back at the Community Tampa Bay office. Hey!
Masatoshi.
Good to see you. How are you doing?
I am better now that I actually see your face. Hey. Hey, E-Mac in the building. Richa in the building, too.
For real. There's so many. This is, I think, one of the things that I'm enjoying about doing some creating spaces with, like, folks, you know, folks that I know or have some history with is, like, seeing a lot of mutual friends, folks that we've known over the years. It's like, oh, we could have like a little. So, it's boss. So let's go ahead and get it started. Cet Mohamed-Moore, if you can introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself for the folks who don't already know.
Masatoshi Charles Mochizuki. I am Cet Mohamed-Moore, for those of you who did not know my name prior to this. I went to Anytown in 2003. Funnily enough, I got the application because of MASA. I was in the Principal's Multicultural Advisory Committee back then. Hey, Rinsha. And went to Anytown then. Went to the Navy straight out of high school. Got sick during my first tour, came out. But while I was in high school, I started in queer activism. Back before that was popular, back when same-sex marriage was the big deal of the day, and just being accepted was the big deal of the day, and not wanting to be called a dyke when you walked around with your friends was a big deal. So pre-Tumblr and pre all of these accepting communities, came out, still got back into activism. I've freelanced for a number of years doing communications, doing whatever I needed to make ends meet. I'm currently back in school to finish up a degree that I started in my 20s, because I am in my 30s, for those of y'all that didn't do math. I am in my mid-30s. So I'm finishing up a degree in a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Digital Film. And for me, that's something that I have always been interested in. I forgot about it for a while. I put it on the back burner. Being interested in filmmaking, and for me it's just another avenue of art that I'm interested in, and it's a way to put together multiple things that fuel me, like making art with your hands, making art with pictures, and then writing, putting them together with some sort of production value. Although I'm not gonna lie to you, the production value is not always there if it's rushed, but yeah, that's what I'm doing now. And what hopefully I'll be doing more of in the future. I've worked on a few independent films, worked on a documentary a few years ago about prescription pill addiction before that became a national story and before some things went into effect to make Florida less of a pill mill. But yeah, that's what I've done over the years. And right now I've taken a step back. Well, a few years ago, I took a step back from going to all the protests all the time, because I also have an autoimmune disorder, and I learned that doing all the things all the time was not healthy. So long before this pandemic came, that was not a priority of mine, being at everything, and I wanted to find other ways to be of service without burning myself out. And art is one way, and I've figured out in the last few years that spiritual activism and like creating community, especially in spiritual communities and art, is a lane that I am meant to occupy.
Boss, there's so much there, and I think definitely before we close out, we gotta drop all the different links, all the different, like your website, like definitely to get folks connected, because you have created so much media, so much content, and so much context over the years. Do you still use that as a moniker, a context creator?
Oh, for sure. I've taken it off of stuff recently, because I just, in the last year, I've been retooling or reconsidering how I want other people to consider me. But context creator is a thing that I use. Yeah, and there's an old West African proverb that says man is the head, and thinking about head things being the things that move you forward in the world as the world designed by men, right? But woman is the neck. that moves things. And so if I think about the term content is king, to me, context is queen, right?
Mm.
And so as we've seen long before the pandemic, but it's being brought into relief right now, you can have content being thrown at you all the time. Like, oh, Democrats block police brutality bill. But what is the context of that? And then when you go look at the context of that bill, on its face, the content says, when you look at the headline, it says, oh, it's a Republican-sponsored bill. But then when you look at the broader context of it, you see like, oh, there's no real accountability here. It's just logging things. It doesn't outlaw knees on the neck or chokeholds or anything like that. And so, yeah, I do still use that context creator thing. It's just not actively being used right now, but that is a thing.
Okay, so, I mean, clearly I had some preparation of some questions, and already right now I'm like thrown off of all the preparation that I made because, okay, let's go with this. So as you were saying, like, I feel like it was like, we'll get into this later. It's like, no, let's get into it right now. So
Let's do
there
it.
let's get into this right now. So there's a lot of conversation right now. I had this like we did creating space earlier this week with Mike Trepper, and like again like this that there is a lot of conversations that are happening now, especially amongst non-Black folks, particularly white folks, around police violence, around anti-Black racism, and at the same time the content, right? Like the videos, the content, the information. So I really, it's. I would love for you to speak more on the content versus content piece of things, because we have seen a lot of content. What is different now, where it seems that there are a lot of folks who haven't been as involved, who haven't been involved at all, or haven't been as involved, who are taking a more active role in protesting and conversations around anti-Black racism. What has changed, and what is the role of content and context and media and all of that?
Okay, so I'm gonna try to hit all of the points, and so but I might drop something. So it seems like I am, just pick it back up and don't let me forget it. But basically, okay. I think overall we've just are starting to reach a critical mass, and I don't think that we have even reached the point at which, like the most critical point yet. Because if we're gonna use the dichotomy of good and bad to judge things, it's going to get worse before it gets better, because the veil has only started to be lifted for the general population, right? But we're reaching that critical mass because we've had like a narrowing in one way that's allowed us to have an expanded view of things. So having to slow down, so many people working from home, like, yes, there are inequities that a lot of people and people considered essential cannot work from home. A lot of people have lost jobs, but by the numbers, the majority of Americans have been able to still have jobs or work from home, and it's forced them to actually confront things that they were too busy for before or too tired to see, because the 40+ hour work week was draining. So part of the context is we're at home more. There's more time to see what's going on. You were sort of in a pressure cooker, because now school is out for we're June for a good chunk of the country now. School is out. So you have people working from home, people with families or caretakers of kids also trying to do homeschooling with kids too. And so it was sort of crunching their nerves as well. But then with this influx of images, and it's not just from the mainstream media. And so I'm defining media as anything that has a message, that's documenting something or depicting something. And it's not just coming from mainstream media, because with people at home doing their work, sometimes they're sidebarring, going on to Twitter, and they're getting things directly from the source. Whereas at work, when they're on the work computer, that they may have had, you know, an administrator that kept them from being able to do that, right? And so now they're actually able to do some of the things, check on some of the things that matter to them at home. And they're like, oh, damn, son, like, shit is real out here. And in addition to some of the other context is that people are actually starting to realize how not okay they are, and starting to realize that for themselves. And with the veil lifting, which is what's been happening with COVID-19 exposing so many inequities, they're now starting to see how not okay other people are as well. And so now people are starting to have that more personal connection to things that they didn't have before. It was just difficult to connect the dots. And I know that as people who just feel like something is right, a lot of the times, and it seems like from a head brain perspective, we get it. Like, why can't people just do the right thing? But we are social animals. And just because we have advanced in the last 200 years, you know, we've advanced 2,000 years in the last 200 years, our physiology is still the same as it was 10,000 years ago. And we have to feel things for them to be real. And until people were able to slow down and actually parse out the stimulus they're taking in, the sort of media that's being bombarded at them in more than headlines, like look beneath the headlines and actually see what it feels like to take that in and to be exposed to what other people are going through, and to be like, God, that must feel terrible. It really was not going to matter.
So how, I'm curious then, in terms of with media having sort of with the way that you define media, then what do you do? Like, what is your role in media and what is it that the things that you have seen that have been effective? Because I think part of what you're saying is like COVID, this particular event, right? This particular circumstance and context is forcing folks to slow down a little bit, or maybe pay attention, or redirecting priorities and focus in a lot of ways. What role does media play, and how has that changed at all during this time, also, in terms of not just I guess not just in terms of the circumstances of, okay, COVID now, and if I wasn't there checking Twitter, or I wasn't going, like, if I wasn't going to be looking for those sources to begin with, how can media then capture folks who might not have even heard even with COVID, even with some of the sort of forced slowdowns?
So could you repeat the last part, because you were breaking up? So,
my bad. So, as COVID is one kind of element of that, of slowing things down, how has media changed? Has media changed in directing people's attention or focus, or capturing people's attention or focus? Is it entirely based off of my choice to engage in certain media, or is there a way of using media effectively if I'm not paying attention to
okay.
Again, kind of like I said with the neck, like, provide me that context and to turn my neck, that the content is there. How do I look at it? How do I make sure that I am paying attention to it?
Yeah, so there's a couple levels there. I think at the higher or the larger mainstream level, it's not changed, because mainstream media doesn't matter if you're left or right, is going to do what's profitable, and they're going to respond to the times and also sensationalize them. Like, if I don't know how many of you have had exposure to seeing how a news package, so the 2, 3, 4-minute blips you see put together on the news are put together. But basically, you go out, you capture some footage. It might be called like a man on the street thing, or just whatever was going on, plus like a man on the street interview. You put some music behind it, you might color it, and you can manipulate emotions that way, right? And so that's going to happen whether it's Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, and they're going to do that until it's not profitable anymore, and that's what they were doing before COVID. At another level, you have individuals creating media themselves and disseminating it via like Twitter or Reddit or Tumblr. Hey, Yushabo. And they're going to just do they're going to do what works, and they're going to do what they feel is right and share what they want to, and there are no rules for that. And as far as like the consuming of it, part of it is on us. Like how I say social justice is a personal responsibility. Part of that is on us. Part of that responsibility is the responsibility for how we consume media. So the rate at which we consume it, where we get it from, who we trust to give it to us, but then also what we share with our friends or even with people who disagree from us. And then if we are in any sort of organizational or institutional role, what we disseminate to our stakeholders or to our communities as well, because it doesn't do anyone any good if I'm the ED or the marketing director at an organization and I have, if we can say that something is like for sure right or wrong or truthful, if I am taking in all the truthful sources, but I keep them all to myself. So honestly, I don't think much has changed. It's just the rate at which we're getting information, which has been growing exponentially in the last, every year it grows more because the algorithms get more refined. There's more dollars attached to those algorithms. So information is going to find us. And the purpose of media has always been to disseminate ideas and to communicate information. That basic premise has not changed. One thing that I will say has changed, and I would say for the worse, is that as media conglomerates have gotten bigger, the things that matter, like your local newspaper, like for us, that would be the Tampa Bay Times, they've gotten smaller because you have these like little equity firms that go and buy up these papers, sell off their assets, and then leave the paper saddled with debt. And so then our most trusted sources of information are gone. So that sucks. And also subscribe to your local paper if you're not. Right now, the Times is being put out physically only on Wednesdays and Sundays, but you do also get a subscription to the online service if you do that. But that has changed. And so in the absence of that, a lot of younger folks have turned to the internet more, but not much has changed.
So what do you see your role in kind of in that sort of media landscape? Oh, am I frozen?
You're frozen. It's possible that I can't hear you. I see you blinking. I hear you coming back online. Okay. Okay, I hear you. Hey, Greg, Alex. Okay, I see you, and I think I hear you again.
Sorry for the technical difficulties. There's definitely this connection here at the office is better than my home. Why I'm here, and at the same time, it's still in and out. Speaking of conglomerate,
there's some weather rolling by.
We have. Oh, is that why?
Yeah, I've heard some. At least by me, I can hear some rumbling. So.
Okay, so there might be some interference there. So I guess sorry about the interruption there. So I think kind of I want to explore a little bit more of, we know that like sort of with the big media companies and things like that, there is like you said, mainstream has a very particular agenda in terms of, at the end of the day, bottom line, what is the methodology that's going to make money? For independent creators and context creators, what are the different ways to sort of like, in a sense, like why do you choose the ways that you choose to share information and messages? Like, what are the different ways that you create and share, and what is your process for that?
Okay, for me, it comes down to how do I want to engage and what feels most authentic. Because even though people love calling us millennials digital natives, it's not true. We had to learn to use the technology. We just put in the time and effort to learn how to use it. And so with learning to use that technology also came wasting our energy doing too much on some of those platforms as well. So as I was trying to gain my footing on some of these platforms, I would try to remain consistent on them. Like I've had a couple iterations of Facebook, and if you look on my Facebook now, it'll say that I've only been a member of Facebook since 2012, even though I was on there since 2006. And now I don't post that much political stuff that often on Facebook because I burnt out of doing that stuff on Facebook, because I learned kind of early on how people engage. And even though Facebook is sort of the online equivalent to talking out loud in public, it's not the best use of energy. And I don't mean that from like an efficiency, capitalist productivity standpoint, although it's not that either. It does not make me feel good to engage that way on Facebook. And so even if I am on one platform for a while, if I get tired of it or it's not making me feel good, but I still do want to engage with people, I will move on to the platform that I do feel good about. And for me, for a while, at least a year, that has been Instagram. Even though when direct messaging first came out, I was like, this is just another way for people to holler at people sliding in these DMs. This is dumb. And in the last like year and a half, some of my dopest conversations have come out of DMs, and I've never slid in anybody's DMs or hollered at anybody or got a date off of DMs. It's literally all been off of stuff that I've posted and people responding to stuff that I've posted. So I think if, as an independent creator, part of your responsibility is figuring out which platform feels most like an extension of how you normally speak, and learning to speak the language of that platform. So literally just learning how to use it, play around with it, make mistakes, accept that you're going to make mistakes, and also accept that if you choose to put out anything in public, with that is going to come criticism. Decide whether or not you can accept it or learn as you go, because that's literally a part of being human. Not everything that you do, you're going to do perfectly all the time. And nothing that you do well, you're going to start out doing well. Even if you have talent, you still have to hone those skills. That's something that if most of your skills are digital nowadays, a lot of people don't realize. Fortunately for myself, I was an athlete growing up, so I'm used to physical practice and sucking at something before I get better. So I'm able to translate like that to the digital sphere, but literally you are going to suck at something before you become great at it. Just accept that. And because what you see on not just social media, but media period, especially TV, and even before we were on flat screens, you see a finished product. And people don't realize that when you see that finished product on that 16:9 format, that these people rehearsed, they practiced, they have colorists. They knew what they were going to do before they showed up. Like, just because we're used to a rapid rate at which people publish things now does not mean you don't need to practice. And it does not mean that you get to put out stuff without knowing what you're talking about. I know, especially with social justice issues, that it can seem like everything is urgent, but I swear it's not. Because the civil rights movement never ended. So this civil rights movement has been going on. It will be okay if you take an extra week to learn what you're talking about before you disseminate your thoughts on it. It will be okay if you take an extra 2 weeks to learn an editing program a little bit better so that you can convey your idea more clearly if what you want to do is put out a video on that idea. So another part of the responsibility, if you endeavor to create some independent content, is to learn whatever skills, or if that includes programs as well, to hone your craft, hone your ability to communicate and do things that feel authentic and that are an extension of you. Don't do them just because it's the flavor of the day. If you don't know anything about trans people or about economic inequality, but your passion is disability access, don't go just because you have a loud mouth. Don't go now speak on trans issues or some other issue that you don't know as much about, just because somebody's going to listen to you, because now you're actually just going to delegitimize the issue, and you're actually just taking up space that somebody from one of those identities could have actually been using to get a point across. So it's also use your voice responsibly as well. Like on Twitter now, if you go and look at some top tweets for something, you'll see a tweet blow up and somebody will be like, oh, like this happened with PS5 announcement actually. So actually almost anything, but I saw it very recently with stuff about the PS5. Somebody's PS5 tweet blew up and they said, oh, now that I have your attention, blah, blah. And they'll drop a link. And it's cool. Like if you're dropping a link for people to donate to an organization for an issue that's timely, that's cool. But if you're now going to use your next tweets, now that you have people's ear or eyes for a couple extra tweets to talk about stuff that you don't have an authority on, that you don't have any knowledge on, but people are looking at you as an authority, that's irresponsible. That's irresponsible AF.
That, I think that resonates a lot because even for myself, I think, I mean, I've definitely participated in that practice of feeling that sense of urgency, or that false sense of urgency of like, for whatever reason, I need to be doing something, and centering myself in the process as opposed to what is the responsible thing to do. And there are definitely, I think, with a lot of information coming out, I think one of the things too is like, for example, there was the 8 Can't Wait campaign, right? That popped off, and that was something that a lot of folks, including myself, it was just like, oh, here's a thing, like let's propagate this, but not really looking at the research, not really doing the homework behind it, not really educating. And there are a few folks who had a pretty large platform who actually came out and apologized for the fact that, hey, I didn't do my proper research, like I'm stepping off of this, and like letting you all know, like there is a lot of issues with this in terms of research methodologies, in terms of what it's saying that it is able to do. And again, like, let's think critically about some of the things that we are sharing and promoting. So that really resonates with me, what you said of like that responsibility piece, not just of creating, but then also of sharing. Because there are a lot of folks who can amplify other people's voices, but whose voices are we amplifying, and who are they serving when we amplify those voices? So that's definitely something. And I see folks in the comments giving props for dropping that knowledge. So so I kind of want to I feel like we're gonna jump all over the place here. Just letting the folks who are watching know, because there's some questions where I'm like, oh, I want to talk about this too. Like, let's talk about this. And definitely, like, we're moving through. I think one of the things is in this concept of media as a whole, right? There's message. There's a lot of times we're thinking about information. We're thinking about news, and at the same time, art is part of media as well. There's, media is the means of communicating and connecting with folks, right? And sharing information, sharing messages. For you, I would love for you to talk about how art plays a role or factor in sort of media as a whole, media landscape, and then your own personal philosophies around art, around around how you engage with art and media in that sense.
Okay. Well, for me, I mean, art is, without getting too philosophical or getting into aesthetics, art is basically just captured expression. And so since that can come from a place of your embodied experience, like how you walk through the world, that can look like just documenting experience as well. And so there will often be overlap with just media and communicating ideas. But basically, art is just expressing something. So that, and even if you can't see, there's usually a visual aspect to it and something that you can feel. Like maybe you look at it and can feel something, but even if you can't see, there's a physical form to it. And for me, I think art, and especially during times like this, is critical because art, especially during times for which there is no written record of what's going on, art is your record of what happened. And it may have just been like water pitchers or plates and sculptures, but art proved that somebody at this time existed and that some people that looked like this existed, or that thought like this, or that felt like this, or that loved like this existed. Toni Morrison has a quote that I believe was from W's presidency, that like, I know the world is hurting right now, artists, but it's still your responsibility to create. And as somebody for whom this pandemic, like, can you see me? Okay.
Yes, sorry
about
you
that.
cut out. I heard for somebody for whom this pandemic.
Yeah, for somebody for whom this pandemic flat out did screw, especially in the beginning. I still felt a sense of urgency around, like, I can't just like wallow in whatever I'm going through and not make anything. So I am going to resume like publishing some of the stuff that I'm writing. And I do have like a couple things backlogged to publish, but I felt that it was very important for me to still be creating, because especially if you are somebody that suffers with any sort of like depressive issues or anything like that, times of stress and trauma can affect your memory and make your recollections of time really cloudy or non-existent. And the fact that you bother to capture anything, that express anything, sort of proves to yourself you were there. Like, so it might sound kind of selfish of sort of like making a moment permanent. And this is why I say that art is captured expression, because otherwise all you have is a moment. So art is decidedly not just presence. You can turn your presence into art, like in the case of performance art, but you were subjecting other people there and you created an experience out of this. So that takes it beyond just mere presence, right? If that makes sense. Like, I'm trying not to get too dense with this, but trying to define art is it becomes this exercise in futility. So that's why I just leave it at captured expression. But it proves you were there. And even, and this is where I say like art and media can overlap, because if you're walking by a wall and you put Mochi MC was there, like, you've documented that you were there. And
sorry, just to interrupt, the level of familiarity where you're throwing in old AOL handles. Oh my gosh. Okay, go ahead.
It is still your handle. Can you see me?
There. Yes, I can see you.
Can you see me? Okay, sorry. I ran out of screen time and I had to ask for more for the day. It is still your handle your MC Mochizuki on Instagram. I think on Twitter. It's Mochi MC, thank you. So still, not to say well.
You're right. That is true. Yep.
But yeah, if you go and tag the wall with some spray paint, Mochi MC, that's where it crosses between, depending on how stylistic you get with it too, like that could become some huge work of art, but you just documented you were there. So that's also just media. If we're going to consider media, which I do, documenting that something happened. But art has an element of posterity to it. So that's, that's a part of like what I consider it. So I hope that answered that part of the question. And what was the other part of it?
I don't know if I'm actually now just caught on. I really am digging I'm pondering the sort of almost like the proof of existence or the documentation of presence. Because I think that also challenges a lot of perceptions around, again, like I think, you know, in talking about, we actually just did the Let's Talk About Racism workshop on dismantling whiteness. And again, like certain perceptions around civility, you know, properness, things like that, you know, thinking about even aesthetics, right? What is considered aesthetic? What is considered art? Who defines that? And I think even then, from that standpoint, then you would say like graffiti, tagging, etching in, you know, your handle, your name would be not seen as art, and yet it fully functions within exactly what you said, which is I'm documenting my presence. And so I think it's a really great way of challenging some of our kind of collective ideas of whiteness around some of these definitions. So I just kind of wanted to take a second to ponder that. But
and in a way, like in the time that you created in, like art is expression. It can be a bid for connection, because ultimately, what does art do if not connect you to other people? Because somebody looks at something you create and it intrigues them enough to pause on it, even if only for a moment, or they look at it and they say, oh, me too. Like that's part of the fundamental reaction behind memes and why people share memes, because you look at it and you have a reaction, laugh, discuss, or whatever. But the fundamental reaction to a meme is, oh, me too. Like I do that too. Like you look at a meme of somebody's grandma throwing their chancla and you're like, oh snap, my grandma threw her chancla too. Or like, oh yeah, I've had that experience of trying to open up a cake in the middle of the night really quietly and it make that noise. And so it's me too. So art can also be, it's as you're expressing something, a bid for connection as well. And in a way, beyond that moment, once it lives past that moment, it's sort of you creating fossils. Because like once you die, unless you're cremated, you know, like the earth is going to render you a fossil anyway. You have no choice in that matter. And then at some point you return to dust. But with you creating art, like you're choosing what kind of fossils get left behind after you're gone. You don't know how long they're going to be left behind, or maybe you have a moment and you destroy them yourself. But ultimately, like you have some sort of say in what gets left behind, so that if somebody else were to dig up your time capsule, or if it makes it into a museum or somebody's basement and some next generation finds it, you're choosing to have a say in what somebody else can look back and see about this time.
Ooh, which gets into ideas around like consent and creating our own narratives. Yeah, absolutely.
Which is important, because the road to hell is paved with other people's narratives about you and the people you come from. And when has that been more clear than right now, when we're seeing all these Confederate monuments getting toppled, right? Because I mean, these Confederates lost a whole war. The Confederacy lasted 5 years, and then in reaction to Black people getting rights and advancing themselves, the Daughters of the Confederacy was like, you know what we need? Monuments. You know what we need to do? rewrite history. So let's do this in the 1890s. Let's do this in the 1910s and teens. Let's do this when they start advancing in the civil rights era. And now we have this really jacked up version of history. And we can have that because of the exclusion of other narratives, and because of there's so much of, regardless of whatever culture you come from, every one of us at some point comes from an indigenous culture of somewhere else. And our indigenous art was destroyed during periods of colonization. Some are more well preserved than others, or were hidden, or are currently being excavated, or, you know, like sitting in the Louvre or something. You know, the Louvre actually has a Sphinx. I was in Paris earlier this year, and I was like, wow, y'all really have a Sphinx in here. How dare y'all? But that's beside my point. But, I mean, it actually is inclusive of the point. But that your colonizers own a lot of your art and keep it hidden from you so that they control the narrative. So it's super important that people, and especially this is where it ties into social justice now, and part of your responsibility, if you believe anything beside the whitewashed version of history that you're being fed, or have anything beside white supremacist, heterosexist values, is that you need to create something. Because if you don't, when people look back at this time, like if somebody is able to destroy the internet and they only have to rely on what physically exists now, they're going to be able to say that people without opinions did not exist. Zora Neale Hurston has a quote that's something, I'm paraphrasing, and I wish I could remember it exactly because it's actually one of my favorites, but I'm going quickly. But she said, like, if you don't say anything, they'll kill you and say you enjoyed it. And this is what you get to do when no dissenting art, or, and not even dissenting of like just the I disagree, but no opinions to the contrary, or no experiences to the contrary expressed through art and media exist. And this is why, whether it's Twitter or Tumblr or Instagram, memes, sculptures that are not the traditionally approved, that don't meet the traditionally approved definition of a sculpture. This is why all of this stuff is super important. There's this artist, this Kurdish artist named Hiwa Kiwa, or Hiwa Kaiwa, and he resides in Berlin now. And he attempted 7 or 8 times to walk from Iraq to Germany. And he kept getting arrested, and it took him 7 or 8 times to get there. And then he created this installation using pipes, concrete pipes, because this is what migrants would sleep in. And he called it sort of like a hotel. And so he created this installation, and he set it up like some had lamps or books and stuff, where it looked like you can project into your mind people living in this installation. And this is a thing that happened and that happens in places. But if you don't see it or hear from somebody that this exists, you don't know that this happens. But because an artist did this, even if it gets torn down now, there are pictures of this that exist. It's documented in a PBS special about that, where he's included in one of the sections. Like, this gets to prove that people with his experience exist. When people try to say, oh, Iraq doesn't treat the Kurdish people terribly, like Kurdish people love their experience in Iraq, like you get to point to his installation and say, do they love it that much that this one guy tried to escape 7 or 8 times?
This, what you're saying also reminds me of there's a great podcast series called Uncivil that I think in part is telling the oft untold stories of the Civil War era, and particularly with a focus on Black resistance. And definitely, I mean, I know for myself, I definitely am like, these are definitely not things that were in the history books. Like, there's very much usually in the standpoint of, here are 2 major armies clashing, and it's at this very high level of like kind of like authority, official roles, things like that, as opposed to literally having Black women posing as slaves right, to go into Confederate houses, generals, in order to basically spy, get information, pretend that they couldn't read and write, and then smuggle out information to the Union Army so that the Union Army could actually win. And so, like, these kinds of stories of resistance, that when you, and I think part of the context that I remember hearing about that was when we don't document the struggle, then it's easy to replace it with a narrative that, well, it couldn't have been that bad because people didn't actually resist.
Exactly.
People didn't participate in their own liberation. That narrative then overtakes, and I think that is something that I remember hearing growing up in my schooling time, was the sense of, like, again, those Confederate rewrites of history and those narratives that were erasing all of those experiences of resistance, those experiences of exactly what you said, documenting, like, is it really the case? Because there's this whole other story here that says it could not have been as you are saying it has been.
Right. BB said back when I was talking to someone who was throwing chocolate at them. I just want to acknowledge that. No,
absolutely,
and
yes.
That's important. And the fact that, like, podcasts like that exist and are being, like, now that you don't have to wait on the History Channel to do that, and just wait for Black History Month for the History Channel to do that, and for the paywall that exists around the History Channel, because if you don't have cable, you're not going to see that. This is part of that, like, oh, it's the best of times, it's the worst of times thing. Like, this is part of what's different now than before, is the barriers are lower. And so while we now have a bit more of a responsibility to double check the facts on the media that we're consuming, the fact that stuff like that exists and all you have to do is download it or listen to, like, navigate to it on your phone and put it in your headphones and listen to it, is part of what's different. Because that stuff has existed before, but what also existed were barriers in the form of, like, paywalls, and where it was coming from, and also more mistrust of oral histories, but then also not knowing where not knowing, or not even knowing where to begin to fact check something like that. Because with the way that we are trained by white supremacy to go about trusting facts, like, we only trust things if they've been written down by somebody that wore a powdered wig, right? And it doesn't take into account that for those of us that are not white, that literally Europeans came through and destroyed our history. Like, Benin City had central planning, while New Amsterdam and Paris still had horses crapping in the streets. But European colonists came through and destroyed and sacked Benin City. And we had walls that were rivaled the construction of the Great Wall of China. But now that these things are being, like, you would hear people talk about that before, but, like, people would dismiss them out of hand because these people learned about it because that information was passed down through their family by word of mouth. And now, and the books were harder to come by because so few were published. But now, because of the internet, people have been able to scan those books, to scan their original copies and transcribe them to get them back into publication, and demand increased accountability from the governments that hold the artifacts of some of these places that were destroyed to corroborate that evidence. But people have been talking about this, and some of that is able to happen because somebody bothered to talk about it and record it. So, like, record it in a podcast form or on a YouTube video, and then somebody with a larger platform than the person that created that podcast or that YouTube video talked about it or watched it. I mean, like watched that video, and then they used their clout to keep trading up the chain to bring exposure to that thing we're talking about, and now we know about it. But like stuff like what you're talking about has been being talked about, and that's without the internet. Like even with pre-internet, some of the things like you're talking about, even coming from the Caribbean, like some of these things were dinner table conversation in my family. So I grew up in the States, but we're from Trinidad. And some of these things were dinner table conversation because even prior to being kidnapped into slavery, Africans who were free at the time still had ways of navigating, and they knew how to navigate. You still had, once you had freed Africans in the Caribbean that were going between the United States and the Caribbean, and then you had freed slaves that came from America and settled in the Caribbean. They're called Americans with a K. And then you have Africans in the Caribbean who are related to Africans in America along the Gullah Geechee corridor. And so with that coming and going, you got information sent back to the Caribbean. So it actually took me a while growing up to realize that all of this information was not run of the mill, because it makes it in the Caribbean, some of it, actually a lot of it makes it into like calypso or soca songs and stuff. People just, like Americans just miss that because it's behind a do-do-do-do-do, like it's behind a beat that they can shake their butts to. But now that this stuff can be archived in the form of a podcast or a YouTube video that people can come back to instead of you had to be there conversation, or because somebody's uncle was talking about it over a card game, or somebody's aunt was telling you about hearing the story told from a grandma. Now, like, we can actually get somewhere with this stuff, but it's because somebody created it and put it up for posterity. So also, to harken back to what we were talking about earlier with like the responsibility of creating, even when the world is hurting, even when you're hurting, I'm not saying that we have to always share everything we create, but even if we think it sucks, keep it for a little bit longer than you think you should keep it for. And I'm speaking to myself here too, because I've created stuff and thrown it right in the trash. My little sister has some stories about going and when I was younger and taking stuff that I drew or wrote out of the trash, as has my mom. And even now, like, will be painting something. I haven't done a painting in a while. I'm going to start some new stuff soon. But if I'll mess up something, and I've put a knife through a canvas before. I don't recommend that because canvas is not cheap. So don't do that. Just paint over it. But even if you think something sucks, especially if it's a painting, don't just go and throw it away. Keep it around for a while. At least take a picture of it, because it might inspire you to do something else. And if you up and have a heart attack or something, like, the proof that you were here and that somebody thought, felt, loved how you did or what you did might be useful from somebody else that's like you in the future.
I see some hearts on that, and I think we are approaching the end of our time. I think Instagram is gonna kick us off with the 1 hour limit. And I feel like, honestly, I think this organically went to, I had like all these questions prepared, and I'm like, I think this is where the conversation went. Like, this is what engaging media to dismantle oppressive systems looks like. And like, absolutely, like this, like, I think there's a lot that you just shared to think about. Cet, I love how you are facilitating as the guest and asking, y'all have any questions before we go?
Well,
as folks are coming up with any questions before we head out, I also want to kind of give you just an opportunity to shout out your brands, your tags, your whatever, your Twitter handles, all the things. Yeah.
So yes, I am at Cet Mohamed-Moore, CETMOHAMEDMORE. Instagram is the platform I am most active on. Although I do have a page on Facebook that I am working on some found footage edited videos. So as I do them, because I want community conversation and not just anonymous conversation that happen around my videos, I will put them up on my Facebook page, fan page, not the personal page. I will put them up there. But Instagram is where I'm most active. And on my next couple of weeks break from school, over in the next month or so, I will be working on a digital workshop for fans who are Game of Thrones or people that are fans of A Song of Ice and Fire or want to be able to use Game of Thrones to illustrate social justice concepts, the 10 main aspects of social identity, like class, race, identity, sexual orientation, gender, that all of that basic stuff. If you want to be able to use that show, mainly the show with a little bit of backup from the books, to illustrate those concepts to people that actually do want to get it, or you just think it's interesting, there is a link in my bio where you can sign up. And when I launch that, it'll be free. I will send you out an email and invite you to it, because part of media for me is using media to make social justice, but also anything more relatable, and to use it to connect people. And I like, I'm usually not a big digital person. I like in-person workshops, and this was going to be an in-person workshop hosted at Allendale United Methodist before COVID happened. But being that we can't meet in person, and I having an autoimmune disorder and asthma, I'm not even about to try to do this as a socially distanced workshop. So I'm going to test it out in a digital format first. So if you want to sign up for that, just visit the link in my bio. Otherwise, follow me here on Instagram or CetMohamed-Moore.com. If you have any questions or comments about anything I said, just slide in the DMs, but not on any date type stuff, because that spot is taken.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Cet. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. We did not work in the conversation about food that we were thinking about trying to fit in there, but I'm sure we'll something out. Ashley has posted our link for creating space. Please leave us comments, fill out the survey to give us feedback. And with that, we're going to sign off. Thank you so much, Cet.
Well, thank you all. And thank you all for joining in, too. Those of y'all that stuck around. But thanks, Masa, CTB.
Thanks, ma'am. Take care.
You too.
All right, y'all. Greg says thanks. Rinsha, fantastic. It's so good to see everybody in the comments, in the chat, and of course, again, fill out the survey. Give us feedback, other conversations that you want to see happening on Creating Space. We are also doing Let's Talk About Racism for white folks and non-Black people of color to engage in conversations around ending anti-Black racism and allyship. So please keep in touch with us, reach out to us. Of course, we are here for all of it. And thanks for joining in, y'all. Take care.